It started as nothing more than a simple trip, 2 friends, 1 destination, and plans that felt ordinary. But when the hotel receptionist smiled apologetically and handed us the key to a single room, everything changed. Suddenly, the air between us carried weight. The thought of sharing a bed with him wasn't just about space, it was about secrets, about years of unspoken feelings I had buried deep. I told myself it was fine, just one night, just sleep. But my heart already knew, we were about to share more than a room. The journey had started like any other, with laughter echoing between us as the train rolled past endless stretches of countryside. We had planned this trip casually, like friends do, without thinking too much about it. It was supposed to be an escape, a break from our routines, a chance to breathe. He sat beside me with his usual easy smile, talking about nothing and everything at once, his hands moving in that animated way that always drew my attention. I nodded along, pretending to be focused on the scenery outside the window, but inside I was restless. I had traveled with friends before, but never with someone who stirred this unspoken storm in me. There was something about him, something in his voice, in the way his eyes softened when he laughed, that always made me feel like I was standing on the edge of saying something I shouldn't. I pushed the thought away, reminding myself that we were just friends, always had been, always would be. By the time we reached the city, night had already begun to fold over the skyline. We dragged our bags through streets alive with neon lights, our voices rising above the noise as we joked about being lost. When we finally arrived at the hotel, I felt a strange kind of relief. The lobby smelled faintly of polished wood and flowers, and the gentle hum of soft music filled the air. He leaned against the counter as I checked us in, his phone glowing in his hand. I thought of how natural he looked there, how easy it seemed for him to exist in every space. And then, the receptionist looked up at me with a polite smile that seemed to hold back an apology. "I'm sorry," she said gently, "but we only have 1 room available tonight." I froze for a second, searching for the right response. Before I could answer, he stepped closer, his hand brushing against mine as if by accident. "1 room is fine," he said casually, his voice smooth and unbothered. I glanced at him, trying to read his face, but he offered nothing but a small grin as if this was no big deal. My heart, though, wasn't so calm. It beat with a wild rhythm, one I didn't want him to notice. We took the elevator in silence, the quiet between us louder than anything we had shared all day. The room was small but warm, with a single bed neatly made in the center. I dropped my bag near the corner, avoiding his gaze, pretending to be fascinated by the view from the window. The city lights glittered against the glass, but my reflection stared back at me, betraying the nervousness I tried to hide. He laughed softly behind me. "Relax," he said, tossing his bag onto the bed. "It's just a bed. We've slept on worse during trips, remember?" I remembered. I remembered sleeping on couches, floors, even in cramped cars when adventures stretched longer than planned. But this felt different. There was no group this time, no distraction, no excuse. Just him and me, and the closeness that came with it. I turned and forced a smile. "Yeah, you're right," I said, though my voice didn't sound as steady as I wanted it to. We settled into the night slowly, almost cautiously. He stretched out across the bed with that lazy confidence of his, scrolling through his phone, while I sat on the chair near the desk, pretending to check my messages. I kept stealing glances at him, the rise and fall of his chest as he breathed, the way his eyes flickered in the glow of the screen. He looked at peace, unaware of the turmoil inside me. Every laugh that slipped from his lips pulled at something buried deep within me, something I had spent years ignoring. "Are you going to sit there all night?" he asked suddenly, breaking my thoughts. I blinked, caught off guard. "You're going to get a stiff back. Come here, there's space." He patted the mattress lightly, his tone casual, almost teasing. My throat felt dry, but I stood, trying to appear unfazed, and lay down beside him, leaving a careful stretch of space between us. The bed was wide enough, but the nearness of him felt overwhelming. The scent of his cologne lingered faintly, warm and familiar, and it wrapped around me like a memory I couldn't escape. For a long time, neither of us spoke. The silence wasn't awkward, but it was heavy, filled with words neither of us dared to say. I stared at the ceiling, tracing patterns in the shadows, while my mind replayed every moment we had shared up until now. Every smile, every late-night conversation, every time I had caught myself wanting more. I told myself it was just exhaustion making me feel this way, but the truth was harder to ignore in this quiet room with nothing between us but air and a fragile line of space. Eventually, he turned off his phone and shifted closer, just slightly. "You okay?" he asked softly, his voice lower than usual. I swallowed and nodded. "Yeah, just tired." He hummed, as if accepting my answer, and lay back down. But his arm brushed against mine, and neither of us moved it away. My skin burned where we touched, and I wondered if he felt it too. I wanted to ask. I wanted to say everything I had been holding back for years. But the fear of ruining what we had chained my tongue. So we lay there in silence, two friends sharing a bed, pretending nothing had changed, while everything inside me shifted. The room around us faded into the background, the city lights, the muffled sounds of traffic, the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. All I could hear was the steady rhythm of his breathing, all I could feel was the warmth of his presence, and all I could think was how much I wanted to close the space between us. Sleep didn't come easily that night. My eyes stayed open long after the lights went out, staring into the dark. I could feel him beside me, close enough that his warmth bled into my skin, close enough that every move he made sent a ripple through me. I wondered if he was awake too, if his mind was racing like mine, if he was fighting the same battle in silence. I didn't dare turn to look. I just lay there, caught between fear and longing, caught between friendship and something deeper, waiting for the night to decide what it wanted to reveal. The morning light crept slowly through the curtains, soft and pale, painting the room in shades of gold. I opened my eyes to find him still asleep beside me, his face turned slightly toward mine, his breathing steady and calm. For a moment, I simply watched him, caught between the remnants of the night and the new day that had just begun. There was something almost fragile about seeing him like that, unguarded and peaceful, as if the weight he carried during the day had finally loosened its grip. I wanted to reach out, to touch his hand or brush a strand of hair from his forehead, but I held myself back. Even the smallest gesture could change everything, and I wasn't ready for that, not yet. I turned away and stared at the ceiling, wondering how much longer I could keep pretending that my feelings were just a passing thought. Memories from our past came flooding back, uninvited but relentless, as if the silence of the room had pulled them forward. I thought about the first time we met, years ago, when I had just moved to the city and knew almost no one. He had been the first to talk to me, the first to make me feel like I belonged somewhere. He had this way of making strangers feel like old friends, and I, lost and lonely, had clung to that warmth without realizing how much it would come to mean. From the start, there had been something different about him. I had told myself it was admiration, nothing more, but looking back now, I could see the way my chest tightened when he laughed, the way my heart raced when he leaned too close. It had never been just friendship, not really. Over the years, we had built a rhythm together, an unspoken language that no one else seemed to understand. Late-night calls where we talked about dreams and disappointments, moments when we sat in silence without needing to fill it, jokes that only made sense to us. Sometimes people teased us, said we acted like more than friends, but we always brushed it off with laughter. I told myself I wasn't imagining things, that I wasn't secretly hoping there was truth behind their words. I told myself it was safer not to think about it. After all, friendship was certain, dependable. Love was a risk, a leap into the unknown, and I wasn't sure if I had the courage to take it. As I lay there in that hotel bed, those memories pressed against me with new weight. All the little moments we had shared suddenly felt sharper, more meaningful, as if they had been leading us here all along. I thought of the night he had called me after his father passed away, his voice trembling as he admitted he didn't know how to be strong anymore. I had sat with him for hours, just listening, my heart breaking for him, wishing I could carry his pain for him. I thought of the day I had almost told him everything, when we had been sitting by the river, the sun sinking low, and the words had risen to my lips. But fear had stopped me then, and I had swallowed them down, leaving them to rot inside me. How many times had I chosen silence over truth? How many times had I let my fear steal the chance at something real? He stirred beside me, breaking my thoughts, his arm shifting slightly as he rolled onto his back. I closed my eyes, pretending to be asleep, though my chest felt tight with the effort of staying still. I could hear his breathing change, the quiet stretch of his body as he woke. When I dared to peek, he was staring at the ceiling, his face unreadable in the soft light. There was something in his expression I couldn't quite name, something heavier than sleep, something thoughtful. I wanted to ask what was on his mind, but the words caught in my throat. Instead, I let the silence linger, afraid that if I broke it, I would say too much. Eventually, he turned his head toward me and smiled faintly. "You snore," he said, his voice groggy but teasing. I laughed, relieved by the lightness in his tone, though my heart still raced. "I don't snore," I argued, shaking my head. "You must have dreamed that." He chuckled and sat up, stretching his arms above his head. The sight of him in that moment, hair messy from sleep, eyes still soft with drowsiness, made me ache in a way I couldn't explain. It was too ordinary, too simple, and yet it felt like everything. We spent the morning moving through the city, exploring streets lined with cafes and small shops. From the outside, we must have looked like nothing more than two friends traveling together, but inside me, every step, every laugh, every casual touch carried a weight I couldn't shake. When he brushed past me in the crowded market, his hand grazing my arm, I felt a spark that lingered long after. When he handed me a coffee, his fingers briefly touching mine, I wanted to hold on and never let go. He didn't seem to notice, or maybe he did and chose not to say anything. Either way, I kept my feelings hidden, afraid of what might happen if they slipped out. As the day went on, I found myself wondering if he ever thought about us the way I did. Did he ever lie awake at night, replaying our conversations, wishing for more? Did he ever feel the silence between us as something heavy, something waiting to be broken? Or was I alone in this, clinging to something that only existed in my own heart? The questions haunted me, circling endlessly in my mind, but I had no answers. All I had was the warmth of his presence, the comfort of his laughter, and the secret longing that threatened to spill over every time our eyes met. When we finally returned to the hotel that evening, exhaustion settled into my bones, but it did nothing to quiet the storm inside me. As we stepped into the room again, the sight of that single bed waiting for us made my pulse quicken. The night before had been filled with silence and restraint, but tonight felt different. The weight of our shared history hung in the air, pressing closer, daring me to step out from behind the walls I had built. I set my bag down slowly, my heart thudding in my chest, and wondered how much longer I could keep pretending that this was just friendship, when every part of me knew it was so much more. That second night in the room felt heavier than the first. The silence wasn't the same anymore, it had changed into something thick, almost alive, like the air itself was holding secrets between us. We moved around each other carefully, unpacking small things, laying out clothes, trying to appear casual, but underneath every action I could feel something unspoken pressing against us. He sat on the edge of the bed scrolling through his phone, his brow furrowed in concentration, while I lingered by the desk, pretending to write something in my notebook just to keep my hands busy. But I wasn't really focused. My eyes kept drifting to him, and every time I looked, I saw not just the man in front of me but the years of history we carried together. When he finally set his phone aside, he let out a long sigh and leaned back on his elbows. "You're quiet tonight," he said, his voice soft, not accusatory but curious. I shrugged and forced a smile. Just tired, I guess. He tilted his head, studying me in that way he always did when he knew I wasn't telling the whole truth. He had this gift of seeing through me, of knowing when something deeper was hiding under my words. It made me nervous, but it also made me feel seen in a way no one else ever had. I looked away, hoping he would drop it, but he didn't. Instead, he patted the space beside him on the bed. Come here. Let's just talk. We haven't had time to actually sit down since we got here. I hesitated, but the warmth in his tone pulled me closer. I sat down, careful to keep a small distance, though not as much as the night before. He smiled faintly, as if he noticed, but he didn't comment. For a moment, we just sat there, listening to the muffled city sounds outside the window. Then he broke the silence. Do you ever think about how much things have changed since we first met? He asked. His question caught me off guard, because that was exactly where my thoughts had been wandering for hours. I swallowed hard and nodded. Yeah. A lot has changed. He leaned back fully against the pillows, his gaze fixed on the ceiling. I don't know, sometimes I feel like I'm not the same person anymore. Like, the stuff I used to care about doesn't matter, and the things I ignored are the ones that really count. His words hung in the air, and I could sense there was more beneath them, something unsaid that he wasn't ready to reveal. My chest tightened, because I knew that feeling too well. I wanted to tell him that I had changed in the same way, that the older we got, the more I realized how rare it was to find someone who truly mattered, and that for me, that someone had always been him. But the words stuck in my throat, tangled with fear. Instead, I asked quietly, what do you think really counts now? He turned his head to look at me then, and the intensity in his eyes made my breath hitch. Connections, he said simply. The people who stay when everyone else leaves. The ones who know who you are, even when you're not sure yourself. His gaze lingered, and I felt my skin grow warm under it. I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. There was something in his expression that I had never seen before, something tender, something vulnerable. We ended up talking for hours. At first, it was about ordinary things, our childhoods, silly mistakes we'd made, the dreams we used to have when we were younger. But slowly, without realizing, our words drifted into deeper waters. He told me about the loneliness he sometimes felt, even when surrounded by people. He admitted he often carried fears he never showed, afraid others would see him as weak. I listened intently, my heart aching with every word, because I understood all too well. And when it was my turn, I found myself opening up in ways I hadn't before. I told him about the nights I felt invisible, about the times I questioned whether I would ever truly belong anywhere. My voice trembled, but he didn't laugh or dismiss it. He just listened, his hand resting close enough to mine on the blanket that the space between us felt charged. There were pauses in our conversation, but they weren't uncomfortable. They were the kind of silences that held meaning, the kind that allowed the weight of what had been said to settle in. Sometimes I caught him staring at me when he thought I wasn't looking, his eyes softer than usual. Each glance felt like a question I didn't know how to answer. My pulse quickened every time our shoulders brushed, every time the mattress shifted under us and pulled us a fraction closer. As the hours stretched on, the line between friendship and something deeper blurred. I found myself laughing at his stories, but the laughter carried a tremble, as if my body knew the truth my mouth refused to speak. He leaned closer at one point, his face only inches from mine as he whispered something about how he'd never felt so comfortable with anyone. The closeness made my chest ache. I could feel the warmth of his breath, see the faint curve of his lips in the dim light. My instinct was to close the gap, to let years of silence finally shatter, but fear held me still. When the clock on the wall ticked past midnight, the world outside had quieted, but inside the room, the air remained charged. He shifted again, this time lying on his side, his arm brushing mine and staying there. He didn't pull back, and neither did I. It wasn't an accident anymore, it was deliberate, a silent message neither of us put into words. I lay on my back, staring at the ceiling, my body tense with the awareness of his nearness. Every nerve seemed alive, every thought louder than the last. I wondered if he could hear the pounding of my heart, if he felt the same electricity in the space we shared. I wondered if he was waiting for me to make a move, or if he was just as afraid as I was. The weight of unspoken feelings pressed down on me, and though I longed to say something, to admit everything, the words stayed locked inside. So I lay there, my arm against his, our breaths in rhythm, and let the night carry us deeper into the unspoken truth that neither of us dared to confess. That night stretched out like an endless thread, fragile but unbroken, pulling us into a silence that carried more weight than any words could. I lay there, staring at the shadows dancing on the ceiling, listening to the rhythm of his breathing. Every time he shifted, the mattress dipped just slightly, bringing us closer, and each movement sent a ripple through me. The closeness wasn't accidental anymore, it was deliberate, chosen, yet neither of us spoke about it. My thoughts spun wildly, circling between fear and longing. What if I told him the truth and it destroyed everything we had? What if I stayed silent and kept drowning in this ache? The questions pressed against me like stones on my chest, making it hard to breathe. At one point, he moved onto his side, his face only a breath away from mine. I could feel the warmth radiating from his skin, could see the faint curve of his lips in the dim light, could almost count the lashes that framed his tired eyes. For a moment, I thought he might say something, that he might let the quiet break, but he didn't. He just looked at me with an intensity that made my stomach twist. My own lips parted, a confession trembling on the edge of spilling out, but fear caught it before it could fall. I turned my gaze to the ceiling, pretending not to notice, even as my heart hammered so loud I was sure he could hear it. The hours dragged on, filled with small movements and heavy silences. He reached for the blanket at one point, tugging it higher, and his hand brushed against mine. It lingered there for a second longer than it needed to, not quite a touch, not quite a retreat. The skin of my fingers burned from that brief contact, a spark that refused to fade. I wanted to grab his hand, to hold it tightly and never let go, but my body stayed frozen, trapped between hope and fear. Instead, I shifted slightly, close enough that my arm rested against his. He didn't pull away. Neither did I. Every small gesture became loaded with meaning. The way he exhaled slowly, as if calming himself. The way his leg brushed mine under the blanket, a touch so light it could have been accidental, yet somehow deliberate. The way his silence felt full, as if words were sitting on his tongue but never found the courage to come out. My chest ached with the weight of it, with the tension that hummed like electricity in the air. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, almost hesitant. "Do you ever think about what people would say if they really knew us?" The question pierced through me, pulling every nerve in my body taut. My throat went dry, and for a moment I couldn't answer. I wanted to ask what he meant by really knew us, if he was speaking about friendship or something far deeper. But the look in his eyes told me enough. There was a shadow of vulnerability there, a crack in the wall he always carried. I swallowed hard and nodded slowly. All the time, I whispered, his eyes lingered on mine, and in that look I felt 1,000 unspoken things. Regret for the years of silence. Fear of what the truth might bring. And something else, something tender, something that mirrored the storm in my own chest. He smiled faintly then, but it wasn't his usual smile. It was softer, sadder, as if carrying the weight of all the things he didn't say. "Yeah," he murmured, almost to himself. "Me too." We didn't talk much after that. Words felt too fragile, too dangerous, like they could break the delicate balance holding us together. Instead, we let silence carry the rest. But it wasn't empty silence, it was full, alive with everything we were too afraid to admit. I lay there, every nerve alight, every thought screaming at me to take the leap, to reach for him, to speak. Yet I couldn't. My fear of losing him was stronger than my desire to have him. And so I stayed still, my hand inches from his, my body aching with the restraint of holding everything inside. Eventually, his breathing deepened, steady and calm, and I thought he had fallen asleep. I closed my eyes, trying to follow, but sleep didn't come easily. My mind replayed every moment, every word, every glance, dissecting them for meaning. Did he feel the same way? Was his question about being known a crack in the door, or was I just seeing what I wanted to see? The doubt gnawed at me, restless and cruel, but then, just as I was about to drift off, I felt the faintest pressure against my hand. It wasn't a full touch, not quite a grip, but enough that I knew it was intentional. His fingers brushed against mine, hesitated, then stilled, resting there in the dark. My breath caught, and I didn't move. I didn't want to scare him away, didn't want to break the fragile courage it must have taken for him to make that tiny gesture. So I let it be, my hand still, my heart racing, my entire body alive with the meaning of it. The night carried us like that, two people lying in the dark, inches apart, hands almost touching, hearts thundering with truths too heavy for words. It was both everything and nothing at all, a moment that didn't change the world but shifted the ground beneath us. And as I finally closed my eyes, the warmth of his hand against mine lingering like a secret, I realized that we had crossed a line without ever saying so. We weren't just friends sharing a bed anymore. We were something else, something fragile and terrifying and beautiful, waiting for the courage of daylight to name it. The morning light found its way through the curtains again, but this time it didn't feel the same. Something had shifted in the night, something too delicate to name but too powerful to ignore. I woke to find his hand still close to mine, resting near enough that the warmth lingered even without direct contact. For a long while, I didn't move. I just watched him breathe, his chest rising and falling in that slow rhythm that always seemed to calm me. It struck me then how long I had carried this weight, how many nights I had lain awake with words unspoken, and how dangerous it felt now to keep them buried. My chest was tight, as if my body itself was begging me to let the truth out, but the fear still clung stubbornly to me. He stirred, blinking slowly as the morning came into focus. When his eyes met mine, there was a flicker of something unguarded, something softer than I had ever seen in him before. He smiled faintly, but it wasn't casual, it was shy, tentative, like he was testing ground neither of us had walked on before. My heart stumbled in my chest, and for a moment, silence filled the space between us. Then he whispered, "You didn't sleep much, did you?" His voice was gentle, almost too gentle, and I shook my head with a small laugh. "Not really. Too many thoughts." He raised an eyebrow, curiosity shining in his eyes, but instead of pushing me, he simply nodded, as if to say he understood without needing details. The day passed slowly, though we went through the motions of exploring again. We walked through crowded streets, shared meals in small cafes, laughed at silly things just like we always did. But underneath, there was a different current, something alive and restless. Every brush of his shoulder against mine, every time his gaze lingered longer than it should, every silence that stretched just a little too long, it all spoke louder than words. I could feel myself unraveling with each moment, the line between friendship and love blurring until I could no longer tell where one ended and the other began. That evening, when we returned to the hotel, the tension became undeniable. The room felt smaller, warmer, as if it was closing in on us, demanding something be said. I sat at the edge of the bed, my fingers twisting nervously in my lap, while he leaned against the window, staring out at the city lights. His back was to me, and for a moment I wondered if he was as torn apart as I was. Then, without turning, he said quietly, "Do you ever feel like we've been running from something?" My breath caught. The question landed like a stone in my chest. Running from what? I asked carefully, my voice quieter than I meant it to be. He finally turned to face me, his eyes shadowed by the glow of the city behind him. "From the truth," he said simply. "From whatever this is." His hand moved slightly between us, a gesture that encompassed the space, the bed, the air heavy with unsaid things. My throat tightened, my body frozen. This was it, the moment I had both longed for and feared. I wanted to speak, but my lips felt sealed shut. He stepped closer, each movement slow, deliberate, as if giving me time to stop him if I wanted. But I didn't stop him. My heart was pounding so hard it hurt, but I stayed still, waiting. He sat down beside me, close enough that our knees touched, close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating off him. His eyes searched mine, and I could see the conflict there, the same fear, the same hope, the same desperate longing. "I can't keep pretending," he whispered, and the words broke something inside me. My breath shook as I finally let the truth slip out. "Neither can I." The admission felt like a dam bursting, years of silence collapsing under the weight of those few words. For a moment, neither of us moved. We just sat there, staring at each other, our confessions hanging in the air like fragile glass. Then he laughed softly, but it wasn't out of amusement, it was relief, shaky and raw. "I thought I was imagining it all this time," he said, his voice trembling. "I thought I was crazy for feeling this way." I shook my head, my throat tight with emotion. "You're not crazy. I've felt it too. For so long." The look on his face in that moment was something I would never forget, a mix of disbelief, relief, and overwhelming tenderness. Slowly, hesitantly, he reached for my hand. His fingers trembled as they brushed against mine, but when I didn't pull away, he intertwined them, holding on as though afraid I might disappear. The warmth of his hand in mine was more powerful than anything I had ever felt, and I realized then that I had been waiting for this moment for years. We sat like that for what felt like forever, our hands joined, our hearts racing in unison. Words spilled out between us, clumsy but honest. He told me about the nights he had wanted to say something but couldn't, the moments he had caught himself staring and had to look away, the fear of losing me that had kept him silent. I admitted the same, the countless times I had almost confessed, the way I had built walls around my heart just to survive the closeness without breaking. Each confession was a piece of the puzzle falling into place, creating a picture we had both been too afraid to see. The world outside didn't matter anymore. The noise of the city faded, the ticking of the clock on the wall went unheard. All that existed was him and me, finally unburdened, finally exposed. When he leaned closer, his forehead resting gently against mine, I closed my eyes and let myself breathe for the first time in years. We didn't need to rush, didn't need to force anything. The truth itself was enough, and the closeness of his presence was more than I had ever dared to hope for. That night, we didn't just share a bed, we shared the truth. We lay side by side, fingers still entwined, hearts still trembling with the weight of everything we had finally said. Sleep didn't come easily, but it didn't matter. The silence wasn't heavy anymore, it was full of promise, full of the certainty that we had crossed a threshold together. For the first time, the fear wasn't stronger than the hope. And in that fragile, beautiful space, I realized we weren't running anymore, we were finally facing the truth, together. The night after our confessions carried a kind of stillness that felt different from anything before. It wasn't the silence of fear or the silence of restraint, it was the quiet that follows after a storm, when the air feels cleaner, when the weight is lighter, when everything seems touched by a fragile kind of peace. I lay there beside him, my hand still in his, our fingers loosely tangled, neither of us willing to let go even as exhaustion tugged at our bodies. The darkness didn't feel suffocating anymore, it felt safe, as if the room itself had shifted into a sanctuary. My heart, though still racing, wasn't filled with the same panic as before. It beat fast, yes, but this time with relief, with possibility, with the joy of knowing I wasn't alone in what I felt. He turned on his side to face me, his features softened by the dim light that seeped in from the street outside. His eyes looked tired but alive, glowing with something unspoken yet undeniable. "Do you realize," he said softly, his voice low, almost trembling, "how long we've been carrying this?" I nodded, my throat tight, and whispered, "Too long." A shadow of a smile touched his lips, though his eyes grew misty, like he was holding back tears. "All those years of silence," he continued, "I thought I was protecting what we had. But maybe all I was doing was torturing myself." His honesty cut into me, because I felt the same. I squeezed his hand a little tighter, shaking my head. "You weren't alone in that. I kept telling myself it was safer not to say anything. I thought if I kept quiet, I'd keep you. But instead, I was just losing pieces of myself. The words came out broken, jagged, but true, and he looked at me with an expression so raw that I had to look away for a moment. It was overwhelming, seeing my own pain reflected so clearly in his eyes, realizing how deeply we had both suffered in silence. We talked for hours, whispering in the dark like two people who had been starved of honesty for too long. He told me about the moments when he'd almost said something, the near confessions that had slipped away in fear. He admitted that he had replayed those moments in his mind over and over, wondering what would have happened if he had been braver. I confessed the same, sharing stories of nights when I had stared at my phone, drafting messages I never sent, deleting them before morning came. We laughed at ourselves sometimes, not because it was funny, but because it was painful and absurd how close we had come, how often we had brushed against the truth without ever stepping into it. Eventually, the conversation shifted into softer things, like the first time he realized he might have feelings for me, or the silly little moments that had meant so much more than they seemed. He told me about a night years ago when we had been walking home in the rain, and he had wanted so badly to hold my hand but convinced himself it wasn't the right time. I remembered that night vividly, the way our clothes clung to us, the way we laughed as we ran through puddles, the way my heart had ached with a longing I couldn't name. Hearing him admit that he had felt it too made my chest tighten with both joy and regret. We also spoke about the harder things, the fear of being judged, of being rejected by the people closest to us, of how exhausting it was to carry a truth you couldn't always show the world. He admitted he often felt like he was living two lives, the one people saw and the one he carried inside. I understood completely, because I had been living the same way. "It's exhausting," he whispered, his voice breaking. "Always hiding, always second-guessing yourself. And sometimes you wonder if you'll ever really be seen." I reached for him then, not just his hand but his arm, pulling him closer until our foreheads touched. "You're seen," I whispered. "At least by me, you always have been." He closed his eyes, and I felt his body relax against mine, as if those words had given him something he'd been craving for years. And in that closeness, we didn't need to speak anymore. The room was filled with the sound of our breaths, steady and in sync, and the warmth of his body against mine. We weren't just two friends anymore, not just two people sharing a bed, we were two souls finally allowed to rest in the truth of what we were. The night stretched on, but neither of us cared about sleep. We shared small stories, whispered dreams, even fears we had never admitted to anyone else. He told me he was scared of what came next, scared of what this meant for us, scared of whether the world would accept it. I told him I was scared too, but that I would rather face those fears with him than live another day in silence. That admission, simple as it was, seemed to settle something in both of us. By the time dawn began to creep through the curtains again, we were still awake, lying in the same bed, our bodies closer than they had ever been. My arm was draped around him, his head resting against my chest, and for the first time, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. The fear hadn't vanished, it still lingered in the corners of my mind, but it no longer outweighed the hope. And as his breathing finally slowed into sleep, I whispered words I hadn't said out loud before, words that felt terrifying and freeing all at once. "I love you." He didn't stir, maybe too deep in rest to hear me, but it didn't matter. The truth was finally out there, carried into the morning air. I closed my eyes then, my hand still resting on his back, and let myself drift off too. For the first time in years, sleep came easy, soft, unbroken. And as I slipped into it, I knew this was more than just one night, more than just one room. We had opened a door that could never be closed again, and whatever came next, we would face it together. The morning light filled the room gently, spilling across the sheets and painting everything in a golden softness that made the night before feel both surreal and undeniable. I woke first, my eyes blinking against the brightness, and for a moment I thought I was still dreaming. His head was resting against my chest, his breath slow and steady, his hand loosely holding onto my shirt as though even in sleep he didn't want to let go. My arm was still around him, and though it had gone a little numb, I didn't dare move. I just lay there, watching him, memorizing the way his hair fell across his forehead, the way his lips parted slightly as he breathed. There was a calmness in his face, a peace I had never seen before, and seeing it made something inside me ache with tenderness. The quiet of the room felt different than other mornings. Usually, mornings carried the heaviness of routine, the weight of unspoken words, but this one carried possibility. It felt like a new chapter, like the world outside had paused just long enough for us to exist in this fragile little bubble. I thought about the things we had said, the confessions whispered in the dark, the way our hearts had finally cracked open after years of silence. A part of me wondered if it had all been too much, too fast, but another part of me knew there was no going back. The truth was out now, and no amount of fear could erase it. When he stirred, blinking awake slowly, his eyes met mine, and for a moment he just stared. Then a small, almost shy smile curved on his lips. "Good morning," he whispered, his voice still heavy with sleep. I felt my heart stutter at the simplicity of it, at the tenderness in his tone. "Morning," I replied, my own voice low and rough. Neither of us moved right away. It was as if we were both afraid that breaking the closeness would shatter what had grown between us. Eventually, he shifted slightly, propping himself up on one elbow. His hair was messy, his eyes still hazy, but there was something different in his expression, a softness that hadn't been there before. "Last night wasn't a dream, was it?" he asked, almost as if he was afraid of the answer. I shook my head slowly. "No," I said, my voice steady despite the pounding in my chest. "It was real." He looked at me for a long time, and then, almost hesitantly, he reached out and brushed his fingers against my cheek. The touch was so light, so tentative, but it sent a shiver through me. The weight of reality began to creep in then, not in a way that ruined the moment, but in a way that made us both aware of what lay ahead. We couldn't stay hidden in this hotel room forever. Eventually, we would have to step back into the world, face the questions, the stares, the judgments that might come. I saw that thought flicker across his face, the same doubt that tugged at me. He pulled his hand back slightly, his gaze lowering as he murmured, "What do we do now?" The question hung heavy between us, but I knew the answer wasn't complicated, even if the path ahead would be. I reached for his hand again, holding it firmly this time. "We keep moving forward," I said quietly. "Together. That's all we can do." He looked up at me then, his eyes searching mine, and for the first time, I saw the fear soften into something else, trust. He nodded slowly, squeezing my hand back. We spent that morning in a strange mix of silence and conversation, sometimes laughing about small things, sometimes just sitting quietly, letting the closeness speak for us. There were moments of hesitation, moments when the weight of everything pressed down on us, but then one of us would smile, or reach out, or say something simple, and the heaviness would ease again. It felt like learning how to walk all over again, but this time we weren't doing it alone. As we packed our things to leave, I noticed him pause by the window, looking out at the city below. His posture was tense, his shoulders tight, and I knew he was thinking about what came next, how people would see us, how our lives might change. I walked up behind him and placed a hand on his shoulder, grounding him in that moment. "We don't have to figure it all out today," I said softly. "One step at a time." He turned his head slightly, meeting my eyes, and then nodded. The fear was still there, but there was something stronger now too, resolve. When we finally walked out of the room, leaving behind the place where everything had changed, I felt a mixture of nervousness and excitement. The hallway seemed brighter, the world louder, but inside me there was a calm I hadn't felt before. We weren't pretending anymore. We weren't hiding. The future was uncertain, yes, but for the first time, I wanted it, because he was in it. As we stepped into the elevator, he reached for my hand, not caring if anyone might see. And in that small, brave gesture, I knew we were ready to face whatever waited for us beyond those hotel doors. The city felt different when we stepped out of the hotel, as if the air itself carried a weight and a promise we couldn't ignore. The streets bustled with the usual chaos, cars honking, people hurrying past with their own lives, the hum of voices blending into one endless sound, but for me, everything seemed sharper, clearer, heavier in meaning. Maybe nothing outside had really changed, but inside us, everything had. Walking beside him felt different now. Every brush of his arm against mine, every glance we exchanged, carried something unspoken but undeniable. My heart was still beating fast, not with fear exactly, but with the knowledge that this was real, that we had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. We didn't talk much at first. There was a quietness between us, not awkward, but thoughtful, like we were both trying to process what had happened and what it meant. When we reached a small cafe, he suggested we go in, and I agreed. Sitting there by the window, watching people rush by while we sat still, it almost felt like we had stolen a moment out of time. He stirred his coffee absent-mindedly, eyes lost somewhere in thought, before finally saying, "Do you think it'll be hard?" "Us, I mean." His voice was soft, but the weight behind the question was heavied. I looked at him, really looked, and saw the mixture of fear and hope in his eyes. I could have lied, said it would be easy, that everything would fall into place without struggle, but that wouldn't have been fair to either of us. So I told the truth. "It might be hard," I admitted. "People won't always understand. There will be moments when it feels heavy. But I don't care how hard it gets, as long as I'm with you." My words made his eyes glisten, and he blinked quickly, like he was trying to hold something back. "You mean that?" he whispered. I reached across the table, covering his hand with mine, not caring who in the cafe saw. "I mean it," I said firmly. "I'd rather struggle with you than pretend without you." That broke something open in him, and he smiled then, a small, trembling smile that carried so much relief and warmth it nearly undid me. He squeezed my hand and nodded. "I don't want to hide anymore," he confessed, his voice steadier now. "I don't want to keep pretending. If the world has a problem, let it. I want us." Hearing him say that out loud felt like sunlight breaking through clouds. It wasn't just me anymore carrying this secret, this love, it was us, together, choosing it despite everything. The rest of the day passed in a blur, but it was a blur filled with a strange kind of beauty. We walked through streets we had walked 100 times before, but this time it felt new. Every step beside him was different, every look carried meaning. Sometimes, we'd catch each other's gaze and just smile, unable to stop ourselves. It felt fragile but powerful, like holding fire in our hands, dangerous, maybe, but warming us in ways nothing else could. Later, as the sun began to dip, we found ourselves sitting on a quiet bench in a park, watching the sky shift into shades of orange and pink. The world around us slowed, children's laughter echoing in the distance, the rustle of leaves blending with the soft hum of the evening. He leaned against me, his shoulder brushing mine, and whispered, "Do you realize what this means? We can't go back." I nodded, resting my hand over his. "I don't want to go back," I said simply. This is where I want to be." There was silence after that, but it wasn't empty. It was full of everything we didn't need to say out loud anymore. The years of hidden glances, the swallowed words, the aching silences had finally led us here. And as the first stars appeared in the sky, I realized something important. The hotel room had been where everything changed, but this was where everything began. Not just the confessions, not just the feelings, but the life that would follow. A life built not on fear or secrecy, but on the quiet, steady truth of what we had always known. When he finally lifted his head and looked at me, his eyes shining with that same mix of fear and courage, he whispered the words I had dreamed of hearing for years. "I love you." Simple, unadorned, but carrying the weight of everything. My chest tightened, my throat burned, and I pulled him closer, pressing my forehead to his. "I love you too," I breathed, my voice breaking. And in that moment, the world around us disappeared. It was just us, hearts laid bare, futures tangled together, ready to face whatever came next. We sat there until the night fully claimed the sky, holding on to each other like anchors, knowing the road ahead wouldn't always be smooth, but also knowing we didn't need it to be. Love wasn't about perfection, it was about presence, about choosing each other again and again, even when it was hard. And as his fingers intertwined with mine, steady and sure, I understood something I hadn't before. We hadn't just shared a bed in that hotel room. We had shared our truths, our fears, our hearts. And in doing so, we had found the courage to step into a world that might not always be kind, but one that we were finally ready to face, together.